You already know this feeling. The automatic doors slide open, a wall of cool air hits you, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely. The hum of 1,000 conversations, the smell of cinnamon and sneaker rubber and something fried you can't quite identify, the squeak of shoes on polished tile. Somewhere above you, a speaker is playing a song you haven't thought about in 20 years, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be. In 1990s California, the mall was not a destination, it was a ritual. It didn't matter if you were in the Valley, in the East Bay, in San Diego, or up in Sacramento, the geography was always the same. You knew it the way you knew the layout of your own house. The anchor department store at each end, Mervyn's, JCPenney, Sears, standing like bookends, holding the whole world together. The long corridor between them, tiled in beige and cream, stretching out like a promise. And somewhere in the middle, the food court, glowing like a beacon. But you didn't go there first, not yet. First, you walked. That was the whole point, really, the walking. California in the 90s had a specific version of this because California malls had something most of the country didn't, that particular quality of light. Filtered through tinted skylights, it fell in wide, warm columns onto the tile floor. You could be inside and feel somehow like you were still outside, still Californian, still bathed in something that approximated sun. The crowds had their own rhythm. Weekday afternoons, sparse, quiet, mostly moms with strollers and the occasional retiree doing laps for exercise. But Saturday was a different animal. Saturday, the mall was alive. The parking lot alone was a negotiation. Your parents circling once, twice, 3 times. Someone always claiming a spot that wasn't actually a spot. You didn't care. You were already half gone, already thinking about where you were going first. And the moment those automatic doors opened, that wall of cool, conditioned air hitting your face after the walk across acres of sun-baked asphalt, that was the moment. That was California in the 90s, that 5-second transition from the heat to the cool, from outside to inside, from ordinary afternoon to something that felt genuinely like an event.
The anchor stores were where your parents went. You tolerated them. You shuffled through the menswear section, through racks of things that smelled like department store. That particular combination of fabric sizing and carpet cleaner and old air that every Sears and JCPenney in America shared. Your parents could spend an hour in there. You could spend approximately 4 minutes before the need to leave became physical. Because the real mall was in between. That was the unspoken rule of 1990s California mall geography. The in-between, the corridor, the stretch of stores that existed for no one except teenagers and the teenagers they were becoming. Let's start at Foot Locker, because you always started at Foot Locker. The referee stripe, the black and white, the smell of new rubber and fresh foam that hit you at the entrance like a handshake. The walls lined floor to ceiling with shoes you mostly couldn't afford, but that was fine. You weren't there to buy, you were there to look, to study, to know. In 1990s California, knowing shoes was a form of social fluency. You had to know what was new, what was too new, what was the right kind of new. The Air Max, the Air Jordan, the Reebok Question, lined up on their little pedestals, lit from below like they were artifacts in a museum. Right next door, or close enough, Champs, then Finish Line. You went to all 3, not because you needed 3 opinions on sneakers, but because the ritual required it. The comparison, the deliberation, the performance of deliberating. You'd pick up the same shoe in 2 different stores, hold it, put it back, and somehow that made the afternoon feel serious and important. This was the business of Saturday, and you were very busy. Now, Claire's. If you grew up female in 1990s California, or if you had a sister or a friend or any kind of proximity to the Claire's experience, you know exactly what this store felt like. It was loud without being loud. It sparkled without being bright. Every square inch was covered with something. Hair clips shaped like butterflies, friendship bracelets in every color, hoop earrings in 6 sizes, rhinestone everything. And in the back corner, the ear-piercing station. A padded stool, a gun, a girl behind the counter who looked all of 17 herself, consulting a laminated chart of ear-piercing positions with the focused gravity of a surgeon. Getting your ears pierced at Claire's was a California rite of passage. Your mother negotiated the terms, you made the case, and when it was done, when you walked back into the corridor with little gold studs and slightly pink earlobes, you were different, incrementally, unmistakably different. Claire's understood something about teenagers that most adults didn't, that every small transaction was actually a transaction about identity. You weren't buying a butterfly clip, you were buying a version of yourself, a trial version, returnable after 2 weeks when the trend had shifted. Down the corridor, and this was important, the order mattered, you'd hit Wet Seal. Wet Seal was California in a store, not the California of postcards and tourism, the California of a specific teenage girl in 1996 who was somewhere between who she was last year and who she was gonna be next year. Crop tops and colors that don't have names, platform sandals and wide-legged pants, fabric that felt like a Saturday. The rack was always too full and always slightly disorganized, and that was part of the point. You were supposed to hunt. You were supposed to find.
Wet Seal was founded in Southern California. That was not a coincidence. This was a store that understood its latitude, that understood the specific California teenage girl who needed to look like she'd stepped off a beach even when she was 90 minutes inland. The fashion never pretended to be serious. It was seasonal in the truest sense, not spring, summer, fall, winter, but September before school and summer before summer and the week before dance. Affordable, unapologetic, intensely of its moment. Here's something nobody told you at the time. The mall was not a shopping center. It was an autonomy rehearsal. Think about what it meant to be 13 or 14 in 1990s California. You couldn't drive, you couldn't vote, you couldn't order things online because online barely existed yet. The entire adult world was a locked room you could see through a window but not yet enter. Except at the mall. At the mall, you had money, whatever you'd saved, whatever your parents had given you, and that money was entirely yours to spend. No one was going to stop you from buying a CD you didn't need. No one was going to question the belt with the unnecessary buckle. The transaction was between you and the register. The decision was yours alone. That was enormous. That was, for many California kids in the 90s, one of the first experiences of genuine independence. Not the illusion of independence, the real thing. Bounded, safe, climate-controlled, but real. Which is why Sam Goody mattered the way it mattered. On the surface, Sam Goody was a music store. CDs in clear plastic cases, lined up alphabetically, organized by genre with little plastic dividers, new releases at the front always, cutout bins in the back for older albums that had somehow fallen slightly from grace. But that description misses everything important. Walking into Sam Goody on a Tuesday, new release day, with $15 in your pocket was a decision-making exercise unlike anything else in a teenager's week. New releases dropped every Tuesday, and if something you'd been waiting for was out, the whole day organized itself around that fact. You'd thought about it at school, you'd maybe told someone, and now you were standing in front of it, holding the case, reading the track listing on the back as if there was going to be a test. The listening stations, those changed everything. A row of kiosks along the wall, headphones that had been touched by 100 people before you, but you didn't think about that then. You pressed play, and for 3 minutes you were in a private room inside a public building. The mall noise fell away, the fluorescent hum disappeared, there was just the music, and you, and the question of whether this was going to be worth your $15. Sometimes you listened to something you'd never heard of before, an album in a genre you weren't sure you liked. That was the beauty of the physical music store, serendipity, discovery by proximity. You'd pick something up because the cover art was interesting, or because a friend had mentioned the band once in passing, or because it was next to something else you were already looking for. Spotify did not invent music discovery. Sam Goody had been doing it for decades.
Now, Hot Topic. Hot Topic was born in Montclair, California. That is not trivia. It is the whole story in miniature. This was a California invention, a store that took everything the suburban mall was, bright, safe, brand name, aspirational, and built a dark room at the center of it. Low Gothic lighting, music playing too loud, walls covered in band shirts and band posters, and merchandise that communicated in the clearest possible signal that whoever you were before you walked in, you could be something slightly more interesting in here. The kids who shopped at Hot Topic in 1990s California were sending a message, not necessarily a coherent one. At 14, the message was more feeling than philosophy. But it was something like, I contain more than you're expecting. I listen to things you don't know about. I'm not just the person you see in homeroom. That is not a small thing. That is identity construction in real time. Every mall in California had its unofficial social map. You could tell who a person was by which store they came out of. Foot Locker said one thing, Claire's said another. Hot Topic said something else entirely. And the remarkable thing about the 1990s California mall was that all of these different tribes, all of these different versions of teenage California shared the same corridor. The skaters and the cheerleaders and the kids who only shopped at Sam Goody and the kids who only came for the food court, they all walked the same tile. They nodded. They coexisted. The mall was, in that sense, one of the last genuinely democratic public spaces California had. You didn't need a ticket. You didn't need a reservation. You needed to show up. And showing up was enough. Now let's talk about the food court. Because everything, the Foot Locker deliberation, the Claire's negotiation, the Sam Goody Tuesday ritual, the Hot Topic expedition, everything eventually arrived here. The food court was not about food. Not really. It was about stopping. It was about the pause in the middle of the day when you collected yourself and your friends and whoever had joined the group since you last looked, and you sat in a plastic chair at a shared table and took stock of the afternoon. In 1990s California, the food court had a specific smell. This was not accidental. It was architectural. The ventilation in every mall food court was designed to let certain aromas travel. And the aroma that always won, that always reached you first, somewhere between Sam Goody and the restrooms, was Cinnabon. Cinnabon had opened its first location in Seattle in 1985, but by the 90s it was everywhere. And Cinnabon understood something crucial. Location was everything. They placed themselves near anchor store entrances, near the main corridors, near wherever foot traffic was highest. The scent wasn't accidental. The ovens were positioned so the air intake would carry the smell outward. You didn't find Cinnabon. Cinnabon found you. And then there was Sparrow. The pizza sat under heat lamps in wide, flat trays, pepperoni, cheese, sometimes a white pizza that nobody ordered as often as the sign implied. The slices were enormous, the kind of enormous that felt like a challenge more than a portion size. You folded it lengthwise the way you were supposed to, the way everyone in California had learned from watching someone else do it first.
Sparrow was not fine dining. Nobody pretended it was fine dining. It was fuel. It was the midpoint of the afternoon, the caloric investment that made the second half of the mall possible. An Orange Julius. Orange Julius was technically a drink, a blended, frothy, orange-flavored drink made with a proprietary powder that nobody could fully explain. It was sweet and cold and slightly foamy and entirely of its time. You couldn't describe it accurately to someone who hadn't had one. You'd just say it was an Orange Julius, and they'd either nod or they wouldn't. In Northern California, the food court often had a Jamba Juice, that very California smoothie chain that made you feel, briefly, like the afternoon was also somehow healthy. In the South, it was usually Panda Express, already a California original, already serving orange chicken to lines that never seemed to shorten. The food court was where you stayed too long, where an hour became two, where the shopping was nominally the point, but the sitting and talking was actually the point, where you spent the last of your money on a Cinnabon you didn't need and felt absolutely no regret about it. Here is the part nobody likes to talk about. Because it didn't announce itself, the end of the 1990s California mall era was not a single event. There was no memo, no last Saturday. It happened gradually, and then, in the way of all things that happen gradually, suddenly. The first sign was the stores you stopped seeing. In 1995, Jeff Bezos launched a website called Amazon from a garage in Bellevue, Washington. At the time, it sold books. You could order a book, just a book, and it would arrive at your house in a week or two. Most people who heard about this thought it was a novelty, a convenience for people who lived far from a bookstore. Nobody in the California mall saw it coming. Why would they? In 1995, the mall was still at its peak, still crowded, still warm, still smelling of Cinnabon and sneaker rubber and the particular cologne that drifted out of Abercrombie like a weather system. But the forces were already in motion. Walmart had been spreading through California suburbs since the early 90s, those enormous, parking lot-dominant big-box stores that offered the same products for less money in a building the size of an airplane hangar. You didn't need to walk a corridor to get there. You drove up, you went in, you left. It was efficient, it was utterly without ceremony. And slowly, store by store, season by season, the mall began to feel something it had never felt before. It began to feel slightly less necessary. The anchor stores started to wobble first. Mervyn's, a California original, founded in San Lorenzo in 1949, the kind of department store that your grandmother and your mother and you had all shopped in as different versions of yourselves, began closing locations in the 2000s. By 2008, after decades of serving as the anchor of countless California malls, Mervyn's was gone entirely, all 149 stores, done. JCPenney followed its own slow decline. Sears, which had been an anchor in California malls since before most of the stores in this video existed, filed for bankruptcy in 2018. When an anchor store closes, something structural happens. The foot traffic that the anchor generated, the people who came for the Sears appliance section or the JCPenney back-to-school sale, stops flowing past the smaller stores in between. The corridor goes quiet. The smaller stores, which had always depended on that passing traffic, start to struggle. And then the smaller stores started to go. Sam Goody. The music had moved online. First Napster, then iTunes, then streaming. The physical CD, which had been the entire architecture of the Sam Goody experience, the browsing, the Tuesday release days, the listening station, the cutout bins, became a format that fewer and fewer people needed. By 2006, most Sam Goody locations had been converted to a chain called FYE. By the time the last two Sam Goody stores announced their final closures in 2024, most people didn't know there had been any left at all. Wet Seal lasted longer. It fought hard, adapting, pivoting, trying to keep pace with fast fashion competitors that moved faster and priced lower. But in 2017, the gates came down on all remaining Wet Seal locations simultaneously. Employees received notification by email. The stores closed in a single week. A retail era doesn't end with a ceremony. It ends with a padlock. Hot Topic is still there, one of the surprising survivors. Still dark inside, still loud, still selling band shirts and body jewelry. It has outlasted almost everything around it, adapting through the decades in ways that Wet Seal and Sam Goody and dozens of others could not. But walk into a Hot Topic today, and then close your eyes and try to remember what it smelled like in 1996. Something is different. Not wrong exactly, just different. The store exists. The institution it was part of does not. By the early 2000s, the malls that had defined 1990s California had begun their slow sorting. The Class A malls, the ones in high-income areas, the ones that could attract luxury tenants and international brands, held on. They added restaurants, they added experiences, they evolved. The others began to hollow out. And Amazon, that garage project that started with books, had become, by 2019, the largest retailer on Earth. Here is what we were actually doing in those malls. Not shopping, not really. Shopping was the cover story, the reason you could give your parents, the reason the whole institution justified its existence. But the actual business of the 1990s California mall was something harder to name. You were figuring out who you were. In a world without social media, without the ability to curate a persona online, to present a filtered version of yourself to a selected audience, the mall was the laboratory. You tried things on, literally and otherwise. You walked into Sam Goody and spent 30 minutes standing in front of a genre you'd never explored before, letting the music make an argument. You stood in front of the Foot Locker wall and assessed, not just the shoes, but yourself in relation to the shoes. You walked into Hot Topic and felt the lighting change, and asked very quietly whether this was also you. Most of the time, you bought something small and walked back out into the corridor, and the answer was, not quite, not yet, maybe next time. That was okay. That was the whole point. The 1990s California mall gave a generation of teenagers something that had no digital equivalent and still doesn't. A shared physical space where identity was tried on without consequence, where you could be someone slightly different than you were at school, freed from the fixed social roles that hallways enforce, and nobody was going to screenshot it. Your mistakes were between you and the fitting room mirror. Your experiments were yours, and the friendships that formed in that space, the ones built across food court tables on Saturday afternoons, the ones that happened at listening stations when someone handed you a set of headphones and said, "You have to hear this," those were real, not curated, not filtered, real. California had its own version of all of this, because California is, above everything else, a place that has always taken its teenagers seriously. The mall culture that the rest of the country absorbed in the 80s and 90s, it had been California's own long before that. Fast Times at Ridgemont High wasn't a fantasy, it was a document. That movie, filmed at the Sherman Oaks Galleria, the corridors that every California kid recognized without being told, was a record of something real. The California Mall said to its teenagers, "You belong here. This space is for you. Come on Saturday. Stay too long. Spend your money on something you'll regret in a month. That's allowed. That is, in fact, the entire point." We talk now about the death of the mall. We talk about dead malls and retail apocalypses and the Amazon effect. And all of that is real. The numbers are real. The closed storefronts are real. The hollowed-out anchor spaces are real. But what those numbers don't capture is what was actually lost. Not the stores. The stores were stores. They opened, they ran their cycle, they closed. What was lost was the commons, the shared space that asked nothing of you except that you show up, where the cool air and the warm light and the smell of cinnamon in the corridor was equally available to every kid who could get their parents to drop them off. There's a specific afternoon, somewhere in the middle of a decade, that lives differently in memory than any photograph can hold. You were with someone, you had a little money, you didn't have a plan, exactly, just a direction. The mall opened in front of you the way good Saturday afternoons do, long and full and completely unscheduled. You walked, you looked, you listened, you ate something you shouldn't have, you spent more than you meant to, you came home with something small in a bag, a CD, a pair of earrings, a shirt that felt exactly right, and you sat with it for a while before putting it away. And for a few hours on a Saturday afternoon in California in the 1990s, the world was small and manageable and warm, and you were exactly in the middle of it. That is what the mall was. That is what it gave us. And if you were there, if you know the particular weight of those double doors swinging open, and that wall of cool air, and that first wave of cinnamon, then you know something that can't be streamed or delivered or replicated in an open-air lifestyle center. You know what it felt like to be young in California, when the world was still contained inside four walls and a food court and a Sam Goody with its new releases up front. And that, all of that, was more than enough.